It was just another day in the chaotic world of late-night television, where jokes fly faster than the headlines they're based on. The studio lights were blinding, the audience was buzzing, and the host, a well-known liberal TV personality with a razor-sharp wit, was ready to deliver another monologue that would have everyone talking. But what happened next wasn't just another punchline. It was a moment that would spark a firestorm of reactions, debates, and an unforgettable response that no one saw coming. This is the story of how a simple joke about a necklace turned into a cultural moment that left everyone speechless. The host, let's call him Mark, had built his career on poking fun at the absurdities of pop culture and politics. His humor was often biting, sometimes controversial, but always calculated to get a reaction. That night, his target was none other than Big Shaq, the larger-than-life personality who had taken the internet by storm with his viral hits and unapologetic style. Big Shaq wasn't just a musician. He was a phenomenon, a walking meme, and a symbol of confidence and authenticity. And on this particular night, he was sitting in the front row of Mark's show, wearing a necklace so bold, so flashy, it was impossible to ignore. Mark couldn't resist. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his trademark smirk spreading across his face. "We've got Big Shaq in the house tonight, and let me just say, that necklace, it's giving me early 2000s bling meets pawnshop chic. I mean, is that thing heavy? Or are you just carrying the weight of your own swagger?" The audience erupted in laughter, the kind of laughter that fills a room when someone says what everyone's thinking but no one dares to say. The cameras panned to Big Shaq, who sat there, stone-faced, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the room held its breath. Was he going to laugh along? Was he going to fire back? Or was this about to get awkward? But Big Shaq wasn't one to back down. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on Mark, and the room fell silent. "You know what, Mark?" he said, his voice calm but dripping with intensity. "This necklace? It's more than just bling. It's a symbol, a reminder, and if you really want to know what it means, I'll tell you. But you might not like what you hear." The audience gasped. Mark's smile faltered, just for a second, before he tried to recover with a nervous chuckle. "Well, folks, looks like we've got a story here," he said, trying to keep the tone light. But the tension was palpable. Big Shaq had thrown down the gauntlet, and everyone could feel it. What happened next was a whirlwind of emotions, revelations, and a response so unexpected it left the internet in a frenzy. Big Shaq didn't just defend his necklace. He turned the moment into a powerful statement about identity, resilience, and the price of fame. But before he could finish, the show cut to a commercial break, leaving the audience hanging on the edge of their seats. What was Big Shaq about to reveal? Why did this necklace mean so much to him? And how would Mark, the king of late-night comedy, handle the heat? This is where the story takes a turn, where the lines between humor and heart, between mockery and meaning, blur in ways no one could have predicted. What started as a joke about a piece of jewelry became a moment that challenged perceptions, sparked conversations, and reminded us all that sometimes the things we laugh at carry stories deeper than we could ever imagine. And as the screen faded to black, one thing was clear. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As the commercial break rolled, the studio buzzed with an electric energy. The audience, still reeling from Big Shaq's cryptic response, whispered among themselves, speculating about what he might say next. Was this all part of the show? A planned bit to keep viewers hooked? Or had Mark genuinely stepped into uncharted territory, poking fun at something far more personal than he realized? Backstage, the crew exchanged nervous glances. They knew Mark's style. Edgy, unapologetic, always pushing boundaries. But this felt different. Big Shaq wasn't just another guest. He was a force of nature. And he'd just thrown a curveball no one was prepared for. Mark, meanwhile, sat at his desk, his usual confidence slightly shaken. He adjusted his tie, trying to regain his composure. He'd built his career on being the guy who could laugh at anything and make anyone laugh with him. But Big Shaq's calm yet cutting response had thrown him off balance. What was this necklace really about? And why did it feel like he'd just stumbled into something much bigger than a late-night joke? He glanced at his producers, who were frantically signaling to him from the sidelines. "Keep it light," one mouthed. But Mark knew better. This wasn't going to be light. This was going to be real. Big Shaq, on the other hand, sat perfectly still in the front row, his expression unreadable. The necklace in question, a thick, gold chain with a pendant that seemed to catch every light in the room, rested heavily against his chest. To the untrained eye, it was just another piece of flashy jewelry, the kind you'd expect from a larger-than-life personality like him. But to those who knew him, who really knew him, it was so much more. It was a symbol of his journey, his struggles, and his triumphs. It was a reminder of where he'd come from and how far he'd come. And now, thanks to Mark's joke, it was about to become the center of a conversation no one had seen coming. The show came back from the break, and the cameras focused on Mark, who forced a smile and tried to steer the conversation in a safer direction. "Well, folks, we're back with the one and only Big Shaq," he said, his tone a little less confident than before. "And, let's just say we've got a lot to unpack here." The audience chuckled nervously, unsure of where this was going. Big Shaq leaned forward again, his eyes never leaving Mark's. "You asked about the necklace," he said, his voice steady. "You wanted to know if it's heavy. Let me tell you something. It is, but not for the reasons you think." The room fell silent. Even the crew, usually focused on their tasks, stopped to listen. Big Shaq's presence was magnetic, and his words carried a weight that no one could ignore. He began to tell his story, not in the way he usually did, with humor and bravado, but with a raw honesty that caught everyone off guard. He spoke about growing up in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce and dreams felt impossible. He talked about the sacrifices his family had made, the nights they'd gone without, so he could have a chance at something better. And he talked about the necklace, how it wasn't just a piece of jewelry, but a symbol of everything he'd overcome. "This chain," he said, holding it up for the cameras to see, "isn't about showing off. It's about remembering. Remembering where I came from. Remembering the people who believed in me when no one else did. And remembering that no matter how far I go, I'll never forget the struggle that got me here." The audience was captivated. Even Mark, who had started this whole thing with a joke, found himself nodding along, his usual sarcasm replaced by something resembling respect. But just as Big Shaq was about to dive deeper into his story, the show's producers signaled for another commercial break. The tension in the room was palpable. The audience groaned in frustration, and Mark, sensing the moment, leaned into the microphone. "Folks, we'll be right back with more from Big Shaq. Trust me, you don't want to miss this." The screen cut to black, leaving viewers hanging on the edge of their seats. What would Big Shaq say next? How would Mark handle the rest of the interview? And what did this moment mean for both of them? As the commercials played, social media exploded. Clips of the exchange had already started circulating, with hashtags like "Big Shaq necklace" and "late night drama" trending within minutes. People were divided. Some praised Big Shaq for his authenticity, calling his response a powerful reminder of the stories behind the people we often reduce to memes or punchlines. Others criticized Mark for crossing a line, accusing him of using his platform to mock someone's personal journey. And then, there were those who were just along for the ride, eager to see how this would all play out. Back in the studio, the atmosphere was tense. Mark and Big Shaq exchanged a few words during the break, their tones respectful but guarded. It was clear that this wasn't just another interview anymore. It was a moment, A moment that could define both of their careers. And as the countdown to the show's return began, one thing was certain. Whatever happened next, it was going to be unforgettable. The stage was set, the stakes were high, and the world was watching. But the real question remained: where would this story go from here? As the show returned from the commercial break, the tension in the studio was thicker than ever. The cameras panned back to Mark, who was now sitting a little straighter, his usual playful demeanor replaced by a more serious tone. He knew he had to tread carefully. Big Shaq's story had struck a chord, not just with the audience in the room, but with everyone watching at home. This wasn't just about a necklace anymore. It was about identity, resilience, and the power of storytelling. And Mark, for all his wit and charm, was suddenly in uncharted waters. "Welcome back, everyone," Mark began, his voice measured. "We're here with Big Shaq, who's been sharing some incredible insights about his journey and what this necklace means to him. Shaq, you were saying something about remembering where you came from. Can you tell us more about that?" The audience leaned in, eager to hear the rest of the story. Big Shaq nodded, his expression still serious but softer now, as if he'd decided to let people in, to show a side of himself that wasn't often seen. "Growing up where I did," Big Shaq started, "you learn real quick that life ain't fair. You see people working themselves to the bone just to get by, and you see dreams get crushed before they even have a chance to take off. But my family, they never let me give up. My mom, she'd tell me, 'Shaq, you've got something special. Don't let nobody tell you different.' And this necklace?" He held it up again, the gold glinting under the studio lights. "This was her way of reminding me. She saved up for months to get it for me when I got my first big break. It's not just a chain. It's her love, her belief in me. And every time I wear it, I carry that with me." The room was silent, the kind of silence that comes when people are truly listening. Even Mark, who had started this whole thing with a joke, seemed moved. But just as Big Shaq was about to continue, a voice from the audience interrupted. "That's a nice story. But what about the people you left behind?" The cameras swung to the source of the voice. A young man, maybe in his early 20s, standing near the back of the room. His tone was sharp, almost accusatory. "You talk about remembering where you came from, but do you ever go back? Do you ever help the people who are still stuck in that struggle?" The question hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and charged. Big Shaq paused, his jaw tightening slightly. It was clear this wasn't a question he'd been expecting, but it was one he couldn't ignore. "That's a fair question," he said after a moment, his voice steady but with an edge to it now. "And the answer is yes. I do go back. I do help. But it's not always about throwing money at problems. Sometimes it's about showing people that there's a way out, that they can make it too. And that's what I try to do. Not just with my music, but with my actions." The young man didn't look convinced. "Actions speak louder than words," he shot back, his voice rising. "And from where I'm standing, it looks like you've got a lot of words, but not a lot of action." The audience murmured, some nodding in agreement, others shaking their heads. Mark, sensing the tension, stepped in. "All right, let's keep this respectful," he said, holding up a hand. "Shaq, would you like to respond to that?" Big Shaq took a deep breath, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the young man. "You don't know me," he said, his voice low but firm. "You don't know what I've done or what I'm doing. And that's fine. But don't stand there and act like you've got it all figured out. Life's complicated, and so is trying to make a difference. If you've got ideas, I'm all ears. But don't come at me with accusations when you don't know the whole story." The room erupted into a mix of applause and murmurs, the audience clearly divided. Mark, trying to regain control, jumped in again. "All right, folks, let's take a moment here. This is clearly a conversation that's hitting close to home for a lot of people. And you know what? That's important. These are the kinds of discussions we need to be having. He turned back to Big Shaq. Shaq, I think what we're seeing here is that your story resonates with a lot of people, but it also raises questions, and maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's a chance for all of us to reflect on what it means to succeed, to give back, and to stay true to where we came from. Big Shaq nodded, but the tension in the room was far from resolved. The young man in the audience sat back down, his arms crossed, clearly unsatisfied. And as the cameras panned out, capturing the faces of the audience, some thoughtful, some skeptical, some emotional, it was clear that this wasn't just a TV moment anymore. It was a microcosm of a larger conversation, one about privilege, responsibility, and the complexities of success. But just as the show was about to cut to another break, Big Shaq leaned into the microphone one more time. "You know what?" he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "This isn't just about me. It's about all of us. It's about how we treat each other, how we lift each other up, and how we remember where we came from. So if you've got something to say, say it. But don't just talk. Do something. Because that's what really matters." The screen faded to black once again, leaving viewers with more questions than answers. What would happen next? Would Big Shaq and the young man in the audience continue their debate? Would Mark take a side? Or would he try to play mediator? And how would this moment shape the conversations happening outside the studio, in living rooms and on social media, where people were already taking sides? One thing was certain. This story was far from over. The necklace, the jokes, the accusations, they were all just pieces of a much bigger puzzle. And as the world waited to see what would happen next, the tension continued to build, promising a resolution that no one could predict.